Teeny, and I am broadcasting live from my broadcasting studio here in Staten Island, New York. The topic is we shouldn't call death death. We should call it what's next. And think about that for a second. How do I know that? You know, Walt Whitman said if you read any of his writings in Leaves of Grass, he said he knew that he was infinite, that life never ended. And so, how did he know that? Other people have written about it. I'm writing the book Sage Advice, Wisdom Throughout the Ages. And as I go back from the time of Socrates and Plato, Cicero, Lao Tzu, I find similar messages all the way through, right up until modern times. People like Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Deepak Chopra, going right up to today's times, right? Eckhart Tolle, what they talk about is the now. And what we have to overcome is this small-minded thinking, in my view. The part of it that's my message and what I think is important is we can see all kinds of examples of small-minded thinking, especially today. Our leaders are modeling small-minded thinking, standing up, blaming others for whatever the conditions are, pointing the fingers at each other. Imagine in a company, in a business, if on a certain issue, you had people line up on either one side or the other and then just point fingers at each other as they're wrong, we're right. Nothing would get done. And that's what's going on. And then we have the media joining in with certain sides, small-minded thinking. They're reporting things that fit a narrative and not based on facts. Fortunately, the truth eventually comes out, but then we have big tech doing the same thing. We're surrounded by small-minded thinking. But on November 18th, 2002, at around 2 o'clock, I flatlined. And not because of a health challenge, but because no one told me to avoid the tuna salad in the cafeteria. No, just kidding. I was in Waltham Hospital 5 days earlier. I was totally healthy, doing a seminar, never had any symptoms. 1 second fine, the next second I needed an ambulance. And 5 days later, when I flatlined, I had an anterior myocardial infarction after and while surviving acute necrotizing pancreatitis. But the gift on November 18th was 1 second I was here in a physical existence. The next second I was in what's next, the infinite, one with everything and nothing. And what was fascinating was I could not connect the events together until I got back in my body. So there was the knowing I was one with everything and nothing, one with the infinite grace, infinite mercy, infinite love, infinite everything, just one with the infinite. And words do not describe it. But the next thing too was I remembered back in my body, there was none of this thinking, this small-minded judgmental thinking that we have. It's humans that want people to pay for whatever crimes they commit or mistakes they make, or when people anger us, we hang on to what they did, the perceived hurts, and we hold on to maybe the idea of being vengeful, and we don't forgive. And none of that small-minded thinking goes with us. Because what was next after knowing I was one with everything and nothing was a life review. And only the good I had done flashed before me. All the lives I had touched. The knowing of family and friends and strangers, people I had helped on the street. The good I had done. Think about that. How do you feel when you do good? There's a reason you feel good. Most people have answered that question when I say, how do you feel when you do good? Most have answered, oh, I feel good. There was one guy who said, well, I guess I feel good. He didn't want to let it out. We feel good because that's what we're supposed to be doing, leaving everything and everyone a little better than we find them. But we're so focused on our tiny little acorn brain, getting more things that we won't take with us, gathering fame or acknowledgement or titles or more money. And we use that small minded thinking for validation of who we are. I have trademarked inside out that life is best lived from the inside out. That first we have to make the decision that we're happy and satisfied and grateful. And gratitude was an important part of my journey during that experience, which ended up being 100 days in the hospital and 6 months out of work. I was 40 days straight in the hospital and then 60 days straight in the hospital and 40 out of the next 60. So that's 100 days. And most people think, you go to the hospital, and I remember the doctor telling me in the emergency room that first day, you should plan on an extended stay. And I remember thinking, oh, all right, everybody's in 3 days. I'll be out in 7. But I was grateful getting in the ambulance. Gratitude was so important. Somehow I had this feeling that this was going to be a life-changing event. I had a knowing that all was going to be fine. It never occurred to me, and I never even was worried about dying while in intensive care. The other thing was there was only the now. I think I've said it before. It was like a scene in a play, a scene and then a scene and then a scene. After the life review, I was asked, stay or go. And my consciousness surrendered with, thy will be done. And I can tell you, I'd never surrendered to the moment like that. And I was 50, fully, totally surrendered to the moment. I had present moments, but mostly I was in the past or the future, wanting something different than what was, that was being in the future, and angry at the present, or in the past. It's some mistake I had made. And it's important, why I think this is important to get over small-minded thinking, because we live in something infinite, and it's what keeps us stuck. A lack of self-awareness, filled with hubris and ego, thinking we know best. After all, we think like God does, or the infinite. Think about that. We have a long way to go. That's our job, is to overcome small-minded, acorn brain, limited thinking, and expand to become more like what created an infinite universe. I was watching a physicist last night that said, our sun is like a speck of sand, a grain of sand in relation to the size of the universe. Think about that, our sun. And here we are on a marble. I use a marble because, listen, if the sun is a speck in the universe, then we're smaller than a speck, but I couldn't show it to you. So here we are on a globe, on a garden planet, floating around an exposed nuclear fusion plant that we call a sun, that's the size of a speck, a grain of sand in relation to the universe. And floating around us is a rock that we call the moon that affects our tides. We're living in a miracle. And I think it's important to work on your own small-minded thinking and prove it to yourself, because small-minded thinking is blindly following anything or anyone. We've seen examples of that in history. It's led to despotic regimes like Hitler or Mussolini or Stalin, or today's regimes like China or Venezuela or Russia. Follow me. This is the way we do it. And then they gather a whole group of people who are followers, blindly following, that espouse the party line. And we don't do that in this country. And it's sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes ugly. But our leaders now are starting a movement where they're making one side wrong and the other side right. And it doesn't matter what side you're on because both sides are doing it. It's why I wrote the book, You May Be Full of Shit If. And here, I'll show it to you. You may be full of shit if. It's on Amazon. And I wrote the woke edition just to make fun of the idea that anybody thinks they're right. You may be full of number two. After all, we do know better. You might be a poo head instead of a shithead. My point is, we have to get over ourselves. And I challenge you to do that. Start to think about where you have these small-minded ideas, where you blindly follow anything, whether it's a political party or a religion or any philosophy, where you exclude others and then you make them all wrong because they don't believe your way. Think about what that brought about over the centuries. We know it's not right. That's why this country is about free speech, free thinking, and not wanting everyone to look alike and think alike and act alike and speak alike, because that wouldn't be a society that grows. We wouldn't probably have had all the innovation we've had. Just think about if everybody quit working on an invention because somebody made them wrong. And we have all kinds of evidence of this small-minded thinking, and we know, just looking around, you know that it's not healthy, it's not working. But again, there's some part of you, that acorn brain, that has you convinced you're right, because look at all the people that go on social media to make others wrong. That's just what they do. You think you're going to change anybody's mind on social media? It's such a waste of your energy. I don't even read comments on my social media. And on Facebook, I tell people, don't even comment. It's just my thoughts. You don't have to agree, but I get to express them. That's why I wrote the books. And I have a podcast, You May Be Full of Shit If. And I have another podcast, Different Thinking for Different Times, where I'm challenging people to expand on that acorn brain, that small-minded thinker that not only wants people to pay in a cause and effect world. We live in a universe, but this earth is cause and effect. You're the cause of your effect. But we want people not only to pay here, but to burn in hell forever. And if that sounds small-minded, it's not like what I experienced, one with the infinite. It's not anything like we think it is. And I'm not surprised. I couldn't tie the events together till I got back in my body in intensive care, and later learned, in fact, that I had that anterior myocardial infarction, along with the long time acute necrotizing pancreatitis, until I got out of the hospital, finally, 100 days later, but I wasn't cleared to go to work for 6 months. But I had surrendered to the moment. I was fully grateful in the hospital. I remember one young intern, or maybe he was doing his residency, but he came in on rounds. I was in Brigham and Women's. I was in the second hospital after being transferred 5.5 weeks later from Waltham to Brigham and Women's. And he was a tall string bean, maybe 6'5" or so, and he had other students with him. And he said, "Well, how you doing this morning?" I said, "I'm grateful, Doc." And he got all twisted up. He said, "What could you be grateful for?" I said, "Take a look at my chart." And he did. He studied it and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. You have a lot to be grateful for." And gratitude is another thing that it upsets people when you say, "Hey, what are you grateful for?" Do it at your dinner table. Do it at work at a lunch table. You'll see how people recoil. Now, finally, today we are hearing more leaders use the word gratitude and how grateful they are. And that's important. That means they are awakening and encouraging. They're modeling a behavior that we can all benefit from. And our leaders, sadly, are not modeling good behavior right now. And we have to call them to step up and stop making each other wrong. This environment of small minded thinking has Monday morning quarterbacking being a sport when Monday morning quarterbacks are 100% right. Small minded thinking has us wanting to be right and making all others wrong because we're lacking something somewhere. People who make you wrong, or if you're making others wrong, or if you're gossiping about others or talking about others or making fun of others, it's because we lack something as humans deep inside. We're living from the outside in, and we need people to hear how that person was wrong and how dumb they are, how stupid their position is, because we're missing some basic faith and confidence in ourselves. We've lost our faith that we live in something bigger, that there's a supreme intelligence, an infinite intelligence, whether you call it life itself, as Lao Tzu said, the life force, God, the goddess, the divine, the Abraham, the Moshiach, the Mohammed, the Christ consciousness, the Buddha. It doesn't matter what you call it. We're just living in something amazing that we're really not sure of scientifically. I mean, they think they're getting closer, but even physicists recently did a super collider experiment and wrote about atomic particles acting in an unexpected way. I chuckle because common sense tells us our children, our pets, our bosses, our employees, our employers, our politicians, our neighbors, traffic, people are always acting in unexpected ways. That's our job, is to learn how to handle it and grow and overcome small-minded thinking. And I challenge you to take that journey. See what it does for you. Become more accepting. Become curious and not judgmental. That's been attributed to Walt Whitman. No one has proven that he wrote it. When I read Leaves of Grass, it sounds like his style when you read Be Curious, Not Judgmental. It's like a complete poem. And no one could attribute it to anyone else, which is fascinating. So I'm just happy to say it's most likely Walt Whitman's, but it doesn't matter whose it was. It's a great message. Be curious, not judgmental. Ask people about their position. How did they come to it? What would they suggest that we do as a society? How could they change? Would they consider another point of view? It's curiosity that helps us come to acceptance of others and all the differences we have. Our political leaders today are breaking everything down by race. We're the human race. We have to get over it. And yes, is it our job to leave everything and everyone a little better than we find them? Yes. But we can't take away the striving and achievement and the feeling of accomplishment that people have gotten from overcoming whatever life brings them. They can choose to be a victim of circumstance, but masters of circumstance look at what life is bringing them as a gift. They are in their circumstances for a reason. What can they learn? How can they grow? How can they overcome their challenges? And it doesn't matter what economic level people are at, everyone faces challenges. It's just that some people think the rich have it easy, or some people think the poor, well, they got no worries. It's not true. We all have a journey, and it's small-minded thinking that judges anyone. But certainly those that are well off could share. They have plenty to spare and share. Find a way to share things that support a cause, but not take away people's motivation to achieve and accomplish. I looked at, the recent voting laws. It's interesting how people want to change voting to not have an ID, but I've got to have an ID at the movie theater along with my vaccination passport. I have to have an ID to get anything I want in life. It's amazing. All the places that an ID is required. I have to upload my driver's license for certain websites. Think about that. Are we going to make voting less special and say, well, you don't need an ID? It's a privilege to vote. And why shouldn't we have an ID? And I'm, by the way, a child of immigrants who came here from Italy, from Sicily, over a natural barrier and through a natural barrier called an ocean. And they were checked in at Ellis Island. So it's not unreasonable to have a barrier along our Rio Grande, along our southern border. What we're not talking about is how many checkpoints are there? How many judges are there? How many places are there where we're greeting people, processing them, welcoming them into our country legally? Imagine what it says when we ignore people coming illegally and now they have to hide out. That is not a good modeling of very good behavior. It's okay to have things that people have to go through to become a citizen of the greatest country in the world. Why do they want to come here anyway? And illegally, what's happening is coyotes and smugglers are making money bringing them over illegally. Just think about what we're encouraging. And our Congress hasn't acted on this in years. It's not this Congress's fault. It's not the last Congress's fault. Since before the Obama years, politicians have refused to do something about immigration. Our leaders are not modeling good behavior. It's small-minded to not stand up and say, we welcome you. We welcome all people to this country, and we have various checkpoints through our border. And I can't go to Canada without stopping at a border, by the way. In Vermont, there was a border checkpoint. There should be plenty of border checkpoints and places where people have to cross legally. And if we're not willing to have these conversations, then what we're doing is we're not telling the truth. Not telling the truth is unkind. The truth is kind. So I challenge everyone to overcome their small-minded thinking, their judgment of any one side, their use of a broad brush to paint any group as wrong or right. It's a monologue, and that's not getting us anywhere. We need a dialogue. We need politicians who are willing to compromise. There could be a change in voting rights. Let's compromise, take out certain things, and let's not have federal legislation, but let's point out some states that have not done things that aren't healthy. By the way, New York does not have as much early voting as Georgia does, or Delaware. Delaware has less than Georgia. So why are people railing about Georgia's laws? Think about it. It's small-minded because we want people to think one way or the other. And recently, this president suggested that perhaps the 2022 elections would not be legitimate. Think about that. We're complaining about the last president, and even Hillary Clinton suggested it wasn't a legitimate win by Donald Trump. Fascinating what our leaders are doing. Very small-minded. And it's time for the citizens to call them out, to stand up for a better behavior, and to begin to model a better behavior. But the reason we have it is we think we're the ones. We forget we live in a miracle, something limitless. Then we believe that perhaps things aren't possible. Thomas Edison said, when you think you've exhausted all possibilities, remember, you haven't. We can ask for changes in our Congress, changes in our maybe term limits. How about additional political parties that would cause a negotiation, meaning that if everybody only had 20 seats, they'd have to negotiate to get a majority. We need to rethink things, and we need to think in limitless terms. But more importantly, on the job, in our life, everywhere we have to think about where are we judging others and where are we limiting ourselves, our company, maybe our boss, with small-minded acorn brain thinking. It's up to you to prove it to yourself. Don't take my word for it. But we go from this to that. And what's held us back in recent times is fear of death. And it's been amplified. Remember the counters that were obviously political because they went away, the death counters, they went away when a new president was elected. And there's been more deaths under this president. But COVID is not political. It's not caused by a president. Its solution is not caused by a president, although we did get a vaccine and then this administration is getting people vaccinated. Okay, good for you. That's your job. Are there things that can be done better by all of us? Yeah. We're all full of shit somewhere. And I still have small-minded thinking, but I'm working every day to overcome it. I've developed that level of thinking above my thinking so I can first question it, and many people don't question it. They live their whole life as what I call a reaction to the small-minded thinker. The automatic thought leads them to an automatic response, and the outcomes typically are not healthy. But it's because we believe it. After all, we have a right. That's who I am. I can't change. From somewhere, we all see the horizon as flat. It didn't end with Columbus times. I urge you to push off, challenge yourself, push off from the shore, and go beyond where you see the horizon is flat. Begin to question things. Be curious. Osho wrote the book, Your Answers Questioned, and I think that's a great way to live. But our political leaders are not living that way. Our media is not living that way. Our big tech is not living that way. They're deciding what should be done in so many areas of life because it's small-minded thinking, believing that only one way is correct. We have to get over it. But it begins with each individual. I challenge you to get over it. See if it makes a difference. Work to leave everything and everyone a little better than you find them. Notice how you feel when you do good. That's our job here. Take care of your family. Take care of those around you. Make a difference in life by doing good. And speak up without fear of being canceled. That will make a difference. Any questions? Steve@stevelentini.com. Steve@stevelentini.com. That's Steve, L as in Linda, E-N, T as in Tom, I-N-I.com. I'm glad to have you as a guest on my podcasts, or glad to have you challenge me in any way. And remember, I might ask you, does that sound like